Thanks very much, Dax. All protocols observed. Quite conscious of time, so I will not dwell unnecessarily on long explanations. What I would like to talk about is that there really is a very desperate need for reforming Trinidad and Tobago's IR landscape. And I fear that we are caught in what I'd like to call an anachronistic class war, a war that believes in an inescapable and inexorable antipathy between employer and employee, a war that buys into the concept that employers will always seek to make as much profit as possible, and where possible to exploit workers in order to amass as much capital as possible. And workers are therefore, employees are therefore pitched against that, and that the only way that they could hope to attain any level of crumbs from the table is to have very clear organization, collective organization, and be prepared to engage in antagonistic relationships in order to secure a different outcome, a fairer outcome. Now, I think anybody with a smattering of knowledge of the Industrial Revolution that started in the United Kingdom in the 1780s, going into the 19th century, and with a knowledge of forced labor in our own land, would know that our employment setup has been born out of some pretty hideous and horrendous and evil working structures. And it was necessary that those be challenged, and that the 1930s, which saw great poverty in our region, led to the Moyne Commission, led to certain amount of unrest, were actually important historical events that set us up for being an independent nation. And when we had the Industrial Relations Act in the early 1970s, it meant something and had to happen. But more than 50 years on, we are in a very different situation. And if we can move to the next slide, I would like to start this situation considering an employee's perspective, and then I'm going to talk about an employer's perspective. And I think we're going to see in here far more grounds for collaboration, cooperation, and win-win than for antipathy and antagonism. And I think the sooner we come to this realization, the better we are going to be as employers, and the better this nation is going to be poised to compete in the global market, because I have to tell you, many other employers and many other nations have come to this realization a very long time ago. Human resource management evolved in the 1970s, gained credence in the 1980s, as opposed to personnel management, as opposed to industrial relations, because people who believe in human resource management believe that far from being at odds with each other, far from an employer winning when an employee loses and vice versa, that there is absolute alignment between a winning employer and a winning employee. A winning employer has more to share, and a winning employee has more to give. And it has a great psychological contract and a great sense of meaning for the people who are contributing. And the battle is no longer so much about the truck shop, about ridiculous working hours, about child labor, about being bound to an employer because there was no escape. There are far more battles that are played out that have been ignored or largely ignored in how our employee relations have evolved that are really critical. And I wanted to list a few. I'm starting with gender equality. We have a very young Equal Opportunities Act. And though there are cases coming forward of sex discrimination, they're limited. We continue to tolerate unequal sex relations in the workplace. And we have laws that make it lawful to discriminate against people on the grounds of sexual orientation. I just want that point to land. People cannot help who they prefer, and gosh, what happens in their bedroom is not my business. What is my business is if somebody's being hurt or being vilified because of their personal choices. Hate. We talk about it all the time, but we don't talk about it a lot. We know that our politics are allegedly steeped in race-based politics, but we don't really see much of that coming forth in terms of very clear policies to make sure that doesn't happen. Bullying, maximum leaders, people being afraid to come forward and say things. Victimization, which is the other side of bullying. Health, safety, and the environment. Coronavirus has taught us how absolutely critical it is to have strong HSE policies to keep our people safe, to make that the most important thing. Mental health and psychic well-being. And I make a distinction between mental health and psychic well-being. Most people at some point will have a low ebb mentally. There's still stigma attached to it. Though you may have a flu and there's no stigma attached to that. People, if they're feeling a bit under strain, they tend to hide it. But psychic well-being is different. Psychic well-being is the sense of things being right in your world, of you coming to work and being part of a social system and contributing freely and being rewarded and recognized freely. Domestic violence. Now, employers have a role to play there as well. If you think about it, women tend to be, not solely, women tend to be the large, the main victims of domestic violence. And if you look at employment patterns, there are sufficient women in the workforce. And that means that there are sufficient workers amongst us, female employees, who are the victims of domestic violence, and they need these jobs because the economic security is what's going to help them deal with the evil of domestic violence. But underscoring all of that is a realization of personal purpose. That there is so much that you are giving and receiving in this contract of employment between two adults that goes way beyond what you're being paid and the job that you have to do. So these are the things that are important to employees. And if we move to the next slide, we can have a little look at what's important to employers. Now, I am so glad that the Senator, the Honourable Minister Alison West, referred to Schwab's report, and then it was referred, the ALA report was referred to again. So it's clearly very much front of mind. But what we're seeing is that the most needed skills in the future are things that go right to the heart of an employee's ability to contribute, to seek and secure purpose, and to feel good about it. Critical thinking. You have a problem in front of you. How do I solve it? If this, therefore that. If not this, therefore that. It's a set of logical thinking, problem solving, active learning, continuously reinventing yourself, resilience, being able to survive the ebbs and flows, stress tolerance associated with that, flexibility. And that report also showed that 50% of employees will need to be retrained by 2025. And with 94% needing to do that within 6 months of that figure. And of course, we see here that there's a big component around automation and learning. Now, Ricardo also shared with you it's the strain that the energy service industry is under. An employer needs to be able to compete, and they can only compete if they're equipped to do so. And if restructuring remains difficult because of antiquated legislation, or it's hard to get down with your RMU and sit down and discuss and consult and find good ways of doing things, which may not include LIFO, all those things, it makes it very difficult for an employer to be agile. as somebody who's been involved in many restructuring exercises over the years, I can tell you it takes at least a year to get that sort of thing done to any level of satisfaction. When in 2000, I think it was in 2013, maybe I'm getting the date wrong, Dax will be able to correct me, the major HR focus was on restructuring across the globe. All the restructuring happened within 3 months in the United States. We are still dealing with some of the effects of that period, but they were able to restructure. And then the following year, when you look at the Touche report, their things were on actualization and integration, and so they were able to restructure, get the awkward stuff out the way, and then build. Whilst we're still struggling to set up the organizations we need that make us able to compete and able to give meaningful work to our people. Go on to the next slide, please. These are the top 10 skills there that are needed for in the future, according to LinkedIn. Yeah, analytical thinking and innovation, active learning and learning strategies, complex problem solving, critical thinking and analysis, creativity, originality and initiative, leadership and social influence, using technology. Dr. King spoke about the fact that it's not workers, man versus machine, but man working with machine, human being working with machine. Technology, design and programming, resilience, strengths, tolerance and flexibility, reasoning, problem solving, ideation. These are not the skills of an adversarial industrial relations climate. These are not the skills of when I go to redesign a job on the production line, I have to spend a year negotiating with my RMU to get those different things in, and then determining who the best person should be, and then looking to deliver the training. These are not the skills for people at war with their employers. They're not. And that is a war that nobody will win. Nobody. No matter what's adjudicated in the industrial court, if that is how we continue viewing the employment relationship in Trinidad and Tobago, nobody's going to win. Could we move on, please? I want to talk a little bit about the Amazon example, because this one's interesting. Trade unions have been getting a bit of a battering in the UK and the US since the late 80s. And deeply into the 1990s, and density and membership have been going down. And I was quite interested to hear that His Honor Melvin Daniel did mention the fact that there can be dialogue between employee and employer without the need for a third party. And I think if I had to say one thing, the problem with the Industrial Relations Act, and even to some extent the RSPA, is that it's all conceived of as rights around trade unions, not employment rights. It's not a rights-based legal approach for the employee. Now, employees definitely need the right to access trade unions if they so choose. That is a fundamental right in any civilized society. But it doesn't start with a trade union. It starts with a human being who may or may not choose that right. The freedom to associate, the freedom to disassociate. I read of a case today of a worker who sent a bailiff around to a union because they didn't feel represented. There have been times in the past when certain categories of people did not feel represented by their unions. If you think of the Ford union in Dagenham in England, it was very white male working class. And if you were anything other than that, crap was smoke your pipe. Now they have evolved, but there is that need to be able to feel that you can get access to justice without a third party being imposed on you, without the choice being imposed on you. And the Amazon example is interesting because here we see this employer who is a megalith. I mean, Jesus, I mean, it's huge. And they go to join the union, and I don't think Amazon as employer was too thrilled about that. And they didn't succeed. The union did not succeed. Basically, only a third of the employees voted to join the union. And the reason they did not vote to join the union or did not seek third party representation is not so much because the lowest salary is actually double the minimum wage. It's more than double. The minimum wage in the US is $7.25, and the lowest salary here is $15. And it's slightly less, that lowest salary is slightly less than what good economists call a living wage for that area, which is $17.25. It wasn't so much that. But what it did, what really happened was that by Amazon going into that part of just outside Birmingham in Alabama, which of course is a place that's quite famous for anybody interested in civil rights, is that a lot of people got employed that were unemployed and at a time of the pandemic. And there were people who did not have the skills. We're not so much filling out the list of these top 10 skills I referred to earlier that LinkedIn are looking for. And they got all this, and they got good things like healthcare. So I did read a story in the UK Guardian where a woman would have died of cancer. She had joined Amazon. She had no skills. She'd been unemployed for a while. And within 2 months found out that she had very serious cancer and was able to get $200,000 worth of treatment covered by the health plan that Amazon provided her with. And it saved her life. And the workers who decided not to join the union said, yeah, there are some issues that need resolving. They think their leaders, supervisors could definitely do with some training, but they didn't think they needed a third party to deliver that. Now, the union would claim that, and has claimed that that Amazon subtly imposed some threat that if you join them, you might get less. But the point is that, I mean, that's speculation. The point is for the union to have succeeded in that setup, they had to offer something different and better than what was already on the table. And they didn't do that because they're still in the notion of that class war, which is anachronistic and not getting to the point of what really matters to people, things around health, things around well-being. Now, I think most employers want to be good employers. Not all. Not everybody does the right thing. Not all people are decent. Some employers are cynical. Some employees are cynical. Some union people are cynical. Okay, but I have a firm belief in the goodness of humanity, and I think goodness will prevail. And having said all that, I'm not so naive as to think that there should not be legal structures in place to make sure that happens. And so like Raphael, I do agree that there is a need for the industrial court. I do agree with His Honor Melvin Daniel that a child not embraced is somebody who would burn the village down, because human beings feel unfairness and alienation keenly. Yeah, and human beings are too resilient to tolerate such things for long. But having said all of that, it's really important that we know what's right and that we have clarity. I fear that too many times we've ended up in the industrial court thinking we did everything right, thinking that we did everything that was needed, and for some point to come to our attention that had been missed. And when it was perfectly clear the employer was trying to do the right thing. And I'm speaking generally as somebody who's observed a lot of employment relationships across Trinidad. Clarity is critical. It's a basic. We talk about natural justice. Natural justice also includes having a very clear sense of what's right and what's wrong. And for employers as well as employee. So consistent with that, I think that's key. I come back to rights based. I'm a very strong liberal. And I think the freedom of association, which is fundamental in the ILO, fundamental in our constitution, not fundamental in our IRA, needs to be brought back in line. We all need to feel that we have access to justice, and not just for workers, for all people who are gainfully employed, whether they're very senior, whether they're very junior. Because there are all sorts of ways to be alienated in an employment setup. And yeah, I know I've been going on about this, what I call anachronistic class. Well, I'm actually going to conclude with 3 slides from Herrick Hopsburg. Now, Herrick Hopsburg was a lifelong Marxist. He was Jewish, half English, half Austrian, and came to England mercifully in the 1930s. So he didn't end up in a gas chamber, thank God, and be very much part of the British landscape for years and years. Actually, he was tracked by MI5, as a potential dissident, during the Cold War, and he says some very important things, and I think and I really want to highlight them. And it's no sort of madness on my part that I, who am a liberal, will actually quote a staunch Marxist on the following. So if we could go to the first of Herrick's slides. He says here, yet in my opinion, liberal capitalism and communism belonged to the same intellectual family. Now, this is a man who's buried literally a stone's throw away from Karl Marx and Claudia Jones, Trini, who's established in that lovely little socialist corner of Highgate Cemetery, and Claudia Jones established, a Trinidadian who established Notting Hill Carnival. And here he is saying that this lifelong Marxist is saying that liberal capitalism and communism belong to the same intellectual family. Move on to the next slide. Now, the reason he's actually speaking in German, that's why this is translated. They were both children of the Enlightenment and spoke the same language, right? Children of the Enlightenment. Now, what do we mean when we talk about enlightenment? We talk about a fundamental belief in humanity based on fact, based on data, based on observable realities. And the fundamental assumption there is that we are all equal. For those of you out there who are religious, all equal before the eyes of God. For those of you who aren't, just all equal, full stop. And the next point. Indeed, if both wanted to survive, they would not only have to stop fighting, but work together and learn from each other. And this is the point. We have seen in the very recent past, to our shock and horror across the world, how democracy has been threatened. And a basic democratic right is freedom of association, I hasten to add. How democracy has been threatened. Even countries who put themselves at the forefront of being the homes of liberal democracy, some pretty frightful things have happened there. And we in Trinidad, I don't know anybody in Trinidad who hasn't gone, oh my goodness. But not just in America, not just in the United Kingdom, in India, we've seen it in Turkey. It is happening across the world where democracy is threatened. And he was speaking, and I told you what his background was at the beginning, as somebody who was Jewish coming out of Austria in the early 1930s. The enemy is not the employer who generates wealth. The enemy is not the employee who contributes to that wealth generation. And a consummate relationship where these things are shared is a good thing. The enemy is the cynic who pitches these things against each other and who doesn't allow the state to create an enabling environment where the best result can happen, where Trinidad and Tobago could be as wealthy as it can for the benefit of its citizens. That's where the enemy lies. And the moment our industrial relations landscape gets over itself and realizes that we're all working to the same end, will be the moment we will be in a better place.